World Affairs Council and the River Club, partnering to strengthen understanding of an increasingly complex business world. November 12th's discussion will be leveraging generative AI to change how you do business. More at worldaffairscounciljax.org. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and it's time for the Halloween edition of First Coast Connect. Today, we ask relationship therapists about the causes and emotional impacts of ghosting and share your real-life ghosted stories. Then, is the building haunted or is it just acting? We find out what's really behind the curtain at the periodically paranormal Florida Theatre. And haunted cemetery tours and a Day of the Tread bike ride. We'll talk about all that and take your calls at 904-549-2937. You can also reach out on social media or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. There are only a few days left until Election Day, and both presidential candidates are campaigning for votes in swing states. NPR's Tamara Keith reports Vice President Harris is urging her supporters to vote early.
At a Get Out the Vote rally in Madison, Wisconsin, Harris said there is hard work ahead.
But we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work is joyful work. And make no mistake, we will win.
And for Harris, that means back-to-back days with multiple stops in multiple states. She'll campaign in Phoenix, Reno, and Las Vegas today. Former President Trump is campaigning out west as well. Polls show the race remains incredibly close in all 7 swing states. Tamara Keith, NPR News, Madison.
A top cybersecurity official says there's no evidence any foreign adversary has broken into the U.S. election infrastructure. However, NPR's Jenna McLaughlin reports the threat is not completely neutralized.
Just days before polls close, federal officials are working to reassure Americans that elections are secure. Jen Easterly is the head of the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity agency, CISA.
We have not seen any evidence of foreign adversaries getting into our election infrastructure.
Easterly says she will speak up if that changes. She also says it would be nearly impossible to change the outcome through hacking, thanks to the decentralized, diverse nature of election infrastructure, near universal paper ballots, and auditing systems. However, she warns that foreign adversaries might try to falsely claim that results were compromised. Jenna McLaughlin, NPR News.
A Facebook ad campaign backed by billionaire Elon Musk is spreading false messages that pretend they're from Vice President Harris. The group, called Building America's Future, is falsely claiming Harris says she wants to institute a mandatory gun buyback program and make it easier for undocumented migrants to get driver's licenses. Federal health officials say they have found the source of the recent E. coli outbreak that affected people eating at McDonald's. They say it is fresh, slivered onions. NPR's Ping Huang reports they say the risk to the public is now very low since the onions have been pulled from the supply chain.
Federal health authorities say they've traced the problem to slivered onions sourced from a large produce supplier called Taylor Farms. The onions were processed in Colorado and sent out to 900 McDonald's restaurants, mostly in the West and Midwest. The onions were mostly used on quarter-pounder hamburgers. McDonald's stopped serving the burger in several states during the investigation. Now, they say it's coming back this week, but without the onions in some places. Ping Huang, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And this is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The first phase of an 8-acre redevelopment project opened Wednesday in a century-old Springfield warehouse that's been reimagined as office and event space. Emerald Station is led by Miami-based Future of Cities, which redevelops urban communities with local leaders. Located in Jacksonville's Phoenix Arts and Innovation District on North Liberty Street, which was an area once known for crime and crumbling infrastructure, Future of Cities CEO Tony Cho says they are well on their way to building out all of the acreage.
It's a lot better than it was. We put $5-6 million into this building alone. So we're investing, and so this is now active. So to me, it's already successful. So the success is in the eye of the beholder. So we've already succeeded at opening our first building. We'll open our next building. It's fully funded.
More office and retail space is planned, as are affordable apartments and a grocery store. Elsewhere in Jacksonville, the Gateway Jacks development firm broke ground earlier this week on a retail and business building on Pearl Street. It is part of a downtown project developers say will ultimately include more than 1,200 new residential units, another 200,000 square feet of retail space, plus public parks. This afternoon in Jacksonville, it's going to be beautiful, mostly sunny with highs in the lower 80s. Light winds will increase through the day. Partly cloudy tonight for trick-or-treating. Temps will be in the mid to upper 70s. Overnight lows in the upper 60s.
PR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Learn more at templeton.org. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler. We are talking today about ghost stories, real-life ghost stories. It's Halloween. No better time to dig into real-life ghosting. I'm going to be joined by a couple of relationship therapists and people who have great experience in the field. We're going to be talking about your real-life ghost stories as well. Later in the program, we're going to be talking about spooky encounters at the Florida Theatre and a chilling cemetery tour, along with a Day of the Tread costumed bike ride. But first, there are ghost stories that haunt our inboxes, our dating lives, and our everyday experiences. But what makes someone ghost a friend or a lover or a boss? It's how people are coping with a lot of things today. To talk about it, we're joined by Dr. Gabriel Ybarra, Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of North Florida. Good morning.
Good morning.
Connie Worthy, licensed mental health counselor at Worthy Wellbeing. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Amy Love, matchmaker and arts advocate. Hey, Amy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. We're also going to be sharing your real-life ghost stories and taking your calls. You can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. Let's just start with the basics, Dr. Ybarra. What is ghosting?
Ghosting is the phenomenon of a person engaged in a relationship of some sort, and then suddenly they disappear. They pull up the roots and vanish.
Yeah. And so is this a new phenomenon?
No, you see evidence of this throughout the literature. It's probably been around as long as relationships have.
But it is seemingly more common, or was that just sort of our impression?
I think we're paying attention to it. People are voicing their experiences while dating, their disappointments, their frustrations, and then so we've heard about it, and now it's more of out in the open, probably.
Amy or Connie, do you think that this is more common today?
I think so, based upon just our culture being so much more electronic and so much more global, right? You couldn't ghost your sixth grade boyfriend that was in all of your classes, right? But you can absolutely ghost the person that you met on social media and never see in real life.
And so you see this in your workplace. You probably deal with it quite a bit. What kind of stories do you hear from your clients?
I hear stories of being ghosted and stories of ghosting, often from the same person, which is fascinating. It's such a commonplace in our culture, and anything from romantic relationships to friendships to work, everywhere. It's people just don't respond. And that's kind of how connection is lost.
Amy, I'm interested in your work as a matchmaker because I think of that as sort of an archaic job, but it is something that requires a certain skill set, and ghosting, I would guess, sort of interrupts your best intentions.
I would say that when I advise people pro bono now, I say that ghosting has to be off the table completely. And I try to sell it as a character trait. Like, don't you want to be accountable? Don't you want to bookend this experience so there's no loose ends? But I have to acknowledge that it's not black and white. There are lots of reasons that people ghost.
Yeah. We asked our listeners and to kind of chime in with their ghost stories. And I want to get to some of those because they're really interesting. And I think they show the scope of ghosting and how it impacts people's lives. We got this message from a 55-year-old woman who described herself as crazy and bitter after her husband married quickly after their divorce. But she continued, I'm a big fan of ghosting. I found that it solves many issues of messy breakups, regardless of who initiates it, and allows me to move on. She continued, one time I was ghosted by a man, and then I decided to Google him and found his obituary. So is this a case of a ghosting rooted in misunderstanding, Connie?
Yeah. And that she still loves ghosting after that experience is mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
I think that's such a perfect example of why it can be so harmful. You have no idea why the person isn't responding.
Right. I mean, so they can be based on a misunderstanding. And how often do you think that happens when somebody believes that they've been ghosted and perhaps there just was a miscommunication? Or is it mostly deliberate?
In my experience, it seems to be more deliberate, but I do find that people can avoid reaching out to the other person because they think the other person lost interest, or they're playing hard to get, or they want to wait the appropriate amount of time. And both people are trying not to look too desperate or text too often or respond too often.
Right. It happens in committed relationships. I want to talk about marriage because we got a voice memo from a woman who was talking about ghosting in the context of her marriage. Let's listen.
I met my first husband when I was 14 years old, and we decided to start going out when I was 15. We decided to get married at 18 for me and 21 for him. Needless to say, things were not all perfect. One night, I reached the end of my rope, left at 3 o'clock in the morning, and only spoke to him again across the table during our divorce.
Dr. Ybarra, I want to ask you about that. I mean, can ghosting, in this case, is almost like a power move or perhaps a little passive aggressive. What's your take on that?
It was hard to say from her story whether there was a a deeper, heavier history in the relationship. So we can understand that in cases where there's danger or there's this atrocious manipulation, that perhaps one would have enough and walk away, trying to sever the that sense of being used. But in relationships, you want to learn, right? You want to learn about yourself, what was attractive, what was useful, what was not, and you don't get that learning when you cut so abruptly. So the goal would be to talk it through, as painful as that might be, et cetera. I'm sure we might talk about that later, but that would be my concern in that, even in that situation.
Mm-hmm. And Connie, is it something that sometimes people feel like a sense of superiority if they're able to ghost somebody, that perhaps if they feel like they've been hurt in the relationship, that it's kind of just like a nail in the coffin? Thoughts?
I think possibly. I don't know that that's the most common experience that people have shared with me in terms of why they do it.
Explain that.
For instance, this woman, again, we don't know what else was going on, but statistics and research support that a victim of domestic violence is the most endangered when they are ready to leave. And so in that instance, ghosting would be the safest, most appropriate action to take.
Yeah. Amy, I want to ask about the role of social media. In one message that we got, this person identified himself. He said, I'm a gay man who has ghosted and been ghosted by others in the past. He says, it's typically when somebody sends me something that I find weird, kind of at the early stages of dating. He says it's easier to detach when I meet them online as opposed to actually knowing them in person. So do dating apps make this process easier or make this practice easier?
I think certainly the dating apps are a faster way to find flags. Some people ghost based on grammatical errors. Some people can really read a person's voice through the nuance. Some people are running their answers through Chat GPT, and we really don't know who we're getting at all. So it is an interesting way of kind of like dumbs down the process, and you're not really dealing with that person as a whole yet. And I would urge the people that are ghosted in that sense to not take that personally at all, because they really don't know you. It takes a long time to get to know someone, to really get to know someone. And it's those ghostings that hurt the most, in my opinion.
Do you get the sense, Connie, that this is just kind of in line with our generally degraded sense of obligation to other people that we deal with online, in terms of how we interact with complete strangers in somewhat of an anonymous or at least a removed platform?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a depersonalization that occurs online. And so, it's one thing to, truly look at a human and then just decide that you're not going to give them any answers. It's another thing to not give the person that you're texting an answer. It doesn't feel like a real person sometimes, and it makes it a lot simpler, easier.
Dr. Ybarra, it sounds like you sort of view ghosting as an unhealthy practice, but I'm curious, I mean, is that a fair assessment of your view of ghosting? And if so, why?
I wouldn't say unhealthy per se, but maybe not so useful. So the research on ghosting is fascinating. We used to think it is indeed a reflection of immaturity, poor character. What recent research has found is that it seems to be related to anxiety, and that those who have heavier loads of anxiety, trait anxiety, which is part of them, are more likely to ghost and to be ghosted and to also ghost. They just avoid uncomfortable situations such as breaking up with someone.
That's interesting because I think people view the power dynamic as somewhat the obverse of that.
Right, and there is that as well. So anxiety is only a component of it, but it helps explain the avoidant component part where we distance ourselves from that uncomfortableness.
It sort of breeds anxiety, though, in the person who's been ghosted, right? I mean, it's not necessarily something that spreads joy and good fellowship.
Definitely true. Yeah, and limitless possibilities. You're left wondering for eternity as to what happened, why was this occurring, and there's that vacuum of not learning from that experience.
Yeah, I think the New York Times described it as the silent treatment for all of eternity, and it does, I think, carry that sting, Amy. So, I mean, when you are talking to people who've been ghosted in the past, perhaps are bringing with them some concerns or fears about rejection, how do you counsel them?
I think that clear communication is key to so many things. And Gabriel and Connie, correct me on this. It's kind of like when somebody ghosts you, to really look at it for what it is. It doesn't have much to do with you. It's how somebody is reacting to the situation. So the other person is actually doing something that is reflective of them. It doesn't necessarily mean, because you don't know what it has to do with you. You don't know why they are doing it. So it's really on the other person.
Sure, but it's really hard for people, I think, not to internalize or...
Oh, yeah. That's super hard. And we just have to be kind to ourselves and give ourselves grace in that way and try to move on as quickly as possible to something more meaningful.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we are talking about ghosting and sharing your real-life ghost stories. You can join our conversation live on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. I want to ask you about workplace ghosting, because this is something that we have heard about increasingly. But first, I want to take a listen to this voice memo that we got from Darren.
I was 16 and my first day of a new job working at a gift store for like couple of hours, I guess, in the back room stocking things. And there were so many scented candles back there that the smell started to give me a headache. And by a few hours in, I had a raging migraine. So I went to the manager and said, hey, you know what? I'm getting a little bit of a sore throat. Can I go to my car and grab my gum? Sure. So I go to my car and start the car and drive home. And when I get home, my mom was like, yeah, someone called and said you disappeared. I know it's not the best way to do things, perhaps, ghosting people, but you can't knock its efficiency.
I want to ask you about that, Connie. I mean, is there some value in just being able to cut the cord, not deal with the, all of the things that attach to having to make an excuse, a goodbye, to leave a job if you've only been there a few hours? I mean, as Darren says, you can't knock its efficiency.
Is it the most efficient, though? Her boss could have thought she was dead somewhere, right? There's nothing to indicate to anyone else other than her why she disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And I think culturally, we've established this practice because we're not used to just being direct, and we don't realize that we can communicate directly. And it might not be the most pleasant thing, but it is efficient and effective. And to just say, hey, this isn't working for me, and leave is significantly more efficient.
We've heard, Dr. Ybarra, about people who, are ghosted even by an employer. I mean, I have a coworker that said that she showed up for an interview for a business that didn't even exist. And so there's kind of this like nebulous world out there that is sort of real and sort of isn't. And so ghosting works both ways in the workplace sometimes.
It does. I was trying to wrap my head around that, and you just explained it with that example. But the idea that a person can be untruthful or withholding of information, key information, in either direction is probably, yes, our reality these days. So that, I guess, teaches you to keep your eyes open, to learn to ask questions, and hopefully your counterpart is open and communicative as well.
I want to talk about safety briefly, because we heard from some people who said that they used ghosting to get out of what they felt was an unsafe situation. Let's take a listen.
I ghosted this woman I used to babysit for because I just got a super uneasy feeling the last time I was at her house, and nothing bad necessarily happened to me, but it was a foggy, rainy night and I had to cross the Dames Point Bridge in order to get home. And when her and her husband arrived home, they said that I should just spend the night. They're like, oh, it's too foggy for you to leave. And I was like, I literally have headlights on my car. I don't know what you're talking about. They kept insisting that I should stay, and she also would get irrationally angry or upset with me when I wouldn't tell her about like the struggles I was going through in my personal life. She was very obsessive over me. It just felt off. The children had bruises in weird spots, and too many things were like red flags in my mind. And even though nothing happened to me, something told me the situation was unsafe. So after that night, when I got home and crossed the Dames Point Bridge, she sent me like a long text message, and maybe like the week after too. Then I blocked her number and I never texted her again.
Amy, your thoughts?
I think absolutely. I don't even know. That's like a super ghost, because you've got to stay safe. You've got to go with your gut. Absolutely. I mean, walk out the door. Don't look back. You have to do what you have to do to conserve yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's at some point, Dr. Ybarra, that ghosting is almost like the polar opposite of stalking, right? It's kind of the other extreme.
Right. You might think of it as maybe like a chemotherapy for tough situations, difficult situations, or the ones that raise the intuition in you that danger is present.
Yeah. And what about people who feel like they're doing it just to preserve their mental health, that extracting themselves from a relationship of one kind or another might actually be more harmful?
There again, we bring up that topic of anxiety where we might rationalize to ourselves, I don't want to go through this difficult conversation of, hey, this isn't working for me. But there's so much to learn, and it's really fascinating. You've shared maybe one date, maybe several in a dating relationship, and to wrap it up nicely is so powerful. So it's a double-edged sword, I suppose.
Yeah. Connie, are certain types of people likelier to ghost in your experience, or personality styles, attachment styles? What do you find?
Yeah, I think a person with avoidant attachment is going to be the most likely to
What is
ghost.
that?
That is when someone has a lot of discomfort connecting in a relationship. And so they tend to be the person that might seem comfortable to a lot of people in a lot of situations, but as soon as someone gets too close, they retreat.
Yeah. And what are the attachment styles? I mean, other than avoidant.
So healthy attachment is what it sounds like, and it can be avoidant or anxious attachment. So anxious attachment would be the person that is more heavily pursuing, right? So they're checking in, are we okay? Are we doing okay? And often those people connect because the anxious person is like primed to promote, they're following the avoidant person and the avoidant person's avoiding, and it's making the anxious person pursue further and avoid, and it's just a cycle.
It seems like it would be harder for somebody who's an anxious relationship person to be ghosted as well.
Yeah.
I mean, more harmful.
Yeah, because it can be a really frustrating behavior to be in relationship with an anxious attachment, with a person with anxious attachment, but they're ultimately just seeking reassurance. They are asking, am I okay? Am I okay? Do you love me? Am I lovable? And unfortunately, a lot of times that behavior is what leads to being ghosted.
Is there any etiquette around ghosting, Amy? Are there any best practices, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it?
Well, I really like what the doctor is talking about and taking the opportunity of ghosting, whether you're doing it or it's being done to you, to look into yourself as to the reasons why I feel rejected or why I feel how I feel about this person, or why do I feel the need to not communicate with this other person? Obviously not when you're in danger, but with the lighter fare and, even going into friendships and employers, potential employees that are coming in. Why can't I confront this? What is it in me?
Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us, we are talking about ghosting in relationships. We are also sharing your real life ghost stories. And if you want to join the conversation, you can call us at 904-549-2937 or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to cue off that, Amy, because you talked about friendship ghosting, and we got several responses from people who were ghosted in friendships. One woman wrote about a friend who'd lived with her for a few months when she was house hunting, and a few years later, when she asked if she could stay for a couple of days with her while she attended a conference in Orlando, she said, over the course of a couple weeks, I sent a few messages via text and later emailed and sent messages on social media. I told her even if I couldn't stay with her, I'd love to grab dinner, but never heard back. I eventually sent a note saying that I'm not sure what had happened to our friendship, but I missed our friendship. I eventually removed her from my social accounts. Having a friendship end like this was truly weird and hurtful. There's no resolution, and I'm left confused, and I don't think we had a falling out. I had to stop blaming myself and accept that there's something going on in her life to not even respond to a friend and former roommate who just wanted to catch up. Dr. Ybarra, what is your thoughts about the impacts of ghosting in a friendship?
Probably very similar to an intimate relationship where you're sharing parts of yourself, you've made yourself vulnerable, and there are key and enjoyed events with that individual, and then it's gone. It's stopped for no reason that you can understand. That would be very troubling.
Yeah. We also got an email, Connie says the most hurtful time I've been ghosted was when a friend of over a decade decided that he didn't want to discuss anything with me. We were roommates for a while, so instead of talking to me in person, he waited until I moved out and sent a short text to let me
inaccurate information.
What do you counsel people that you are dealing with when they're in a circumstance like that? What's the best way to kind of come around, come through it, start to feel better about things?
I do a lot of EMDR work, and oftentimes what comes up in these situations is a person's negative core beliefs, right? So it reinforces some negative, often false idea they have about themselves. And so oftentimes we're not just dealing with this one specific ghosting, but we're dealing with every instance in their life where they had that feeling that either they weren't good enough or, whatever it is that they've decided is the reason they were ghosted, which often is not.
I want to talk about dating because that I think is the most common circumstance that we hear about ghosting. And let's take a listen to this message that we received this week.
I was stood up by someone and technically ghosted. We had matched on Bumble, decided to meet up at a restaurant, figured out the time. I went there, texted him that I was there, didn't hear from him, went inside and asked the hostess if anyone by his name was there, if anyone was waiting for someone, and she said no. Waited a little bit, texted him again, didn't hear from him. About a week or two later, he messaged me and said he was sorry. And that was it. He didn't explain why he decided not to show up, didn't say if he saw me and left. And that was it.
Amy, I feel like I've heard a number of friends of mine or coworkers talk about something similar where they weren't even sure if maybe the person had come and kind of checked him out and was like, and then they just, bailed. So is that less hurtful because it's happening at a stage of the relationship where there isn't any emotional investment necessarily? Or does it just feed an anxiety in people who are putting themselves out there on the dating scene and trying to, be available and not necessarily be super vulnerable?
Right. It's like a book without reading the exposition. You're not really attached to it yet. And that's the best way to move on. And thank you, universe, for this early red flag so I don't have to waste any more of my time and let me move on to the masses. I'm ready, people. That's how you have to look at it.
And so do you ever ask people about, their habits when it comes to ghosting, or try to evaluate that before you're trying to match them with somebody else?
Sounds like I just need to send him to Connie because that was some great advice, seeing a consistent pattern. A therapist can help you see and lessen those blows that come and how you view yourself. That's really important because, again, I do believe when somebody is doing the ghosting, it has very little to do with you.
But you've said that you think it just needs to be off the table entirely. How do couples have that conversation, or even friends have that conversation about, like, hey, my expectation is that if we do break up or you do decide to move on, that we'll at least communicate about it?
Well, that's like a rodeo, right? Going to wrangle the pig. You really don't have control over other people. You can set an expectation. That was a weird analogy. I acknowledge that. But, you all you can do is you can speak and clearly communicate your expectation and hope that it goes that way. But you can't control what other people do.
Got a call from Michael on the north side. Good morning, Michael. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I just wanted to speak on, ghosting in the context of dating. I've been ghosted before. And what I do to reassure myself is basically I give that other person an opportunity to show that they're a decent person. I'll reach out to them in text and I'll say, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. I don't know if there's something I did or said to make you feel uncomfortable. If so, let me know. Hopefully we can talk about it. I enjoyed talking to you. Please get back to me. And at that point, I know I'm giving them an opportunity to share with me whatever I may have did or said to make them feel uncomfortable. And if they still don't take that opportunity to respond, then I know then they just don't want to be a decent person. I know that speaks to their lack of character, and it has nothing to do with me. So that allows me to move on regardless of if they respond or not. I know I gave them a chance to show who they are. If they don't take it, that's on them, not me.
Thanks. I mean, Dr. Ybarra, it sounds like Michael has a pretty healthy approach to being ghosted when it happens.
I would agree. I think that's a really nice approach. The provision of an opportunity and the conceptualization that this is a chance for them to come forward and to explain themselves, and you let it go after that. The letting go, I think, could be harder for some than others, but the ability to create that opportunity and then to wait and see what happens is very mature.
Yeah. I want to ask you, because you all are in the business of kind of helping people through crises, and yet nobody is immune from this. So I'm curious, like, if your own experience, if you've had it in your own life, and how that has informed the way that you advise people. Amy.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh. Yes, I've been ghosted. I've ghosted people. And as I get older, I find that I have to follow up with that for myself. And as far as being ghosted, even a parent can ghost you. as something as extreme as that.
Wow.
Especially in our political season. So it runs the gamut. It's for big and small relationships. And what it comes down to, you have to love yourself. You have to learn to love yourself and try to analyze how it's making you feel, and also giving the other person that, like I said, grace, and thinking that they must have some pretty heavy anxiety over something.
Yeah. How about you, Connie? You've been ghosted? You've ghosted?
I haven't dated in a really long time, but yeah. And I think though in my work, I can share my experience and I can share, how I thought about something and what I did and how it felt. But I always have to preface, I'm just a human, and if you want to follow me and mess your life up like I do, like have at it. But it does really inform me wanting to be authentic and direct, even if it's hard.
Mhm.
So if there's someone that I want to ghost, I think about these people who have had the experience of being ghosted, and I think about the people who ghost and how much anxiety and fear there is. And so I really try to be an example, which if I could have paid someone, I would have paid Michael to call and give that example, because it's setting the stage, right? A lot of people, because we ghost so often, only know that as the way to break up, and we don't get a good example of someone who's like, hey, this is how I feel, this is where I am, and promotes continuing to do that.
Yeah. Dr. Ybarra, I'll ask you the same thing.
I've probably had I've had fascinating dating experiences in the past. I would pick Amy's brain, I think, with those online services like
Are you single? Are you single?
No. But the stories were more so just fascination at why this person showed up for a date, and I'm going to buy you dinner because this is an incredible story. The no showing, the estrangement part that Amy brought up. I have a sibling who's sort of ghosted the whole family, and we understand there's a difficult time going on, but and that's painful to not know. Periodically, I'll send just a brief message that I'm there, right, and that there's a chance for an opportunity to reconnect without burdening myself about that responsibility.
Yeah, it's difficult. Well, it's a really interesting conversation. I thank you all for your expertise and your knowledge and sharing it today on the topic of ghosting. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yep. Up next, raising the curtain on what's reputed to be one of Jacksonville's most haunted locations. Welcome back. The Florida Theater has long been rumored to be haunted, not sadly with the ghost of Elvis, who performed there, but here to tell us about the theater's ghostly encounters is Numa Saisselin, president of the Florida Theater. Welcome, Numa.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Nice to have you.
It's nice to be here on Halloween.
I know. Well, let's talk about this. I mean, this is a spot that's obviously had a very storied history, many great performers, not just Elvis, but it also has a reputation for being haunted.
Yes. So before the Florida Theater was on the corner of Forsyth and Noonan, the city jail was there.
Oh.
So the city jail was on that site. So there is some thought that maybe some of the ghosts who inhabit the theater have something to do with the jail, although we've never seen anybody in chains and uniforms. But there are two ghosts that have been seen at the Florida Theater repeatedly.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Not by me, unfortunately.
You're open to it.
I'm open to it. I have seen nothing to prove or disprove, so I'm kind of open to the idea.
Well, tell us about the experiences that you've heard. What have your employees reported to have seen?
So there's a woman in a Victorian dress who has been seen floating across the balcony lobby, most recently by one of our volunteers. But the ghost who gets seen most frequently, we think his name is Jay.
Explain.
In the 1980s, a psychic investigation by WJCT, of all people. WJCT Public Television had a psychic, and she investigated the Florida Theater and talked to the ghost, who told her his name was Jay, like the letter J, because he felt joy for being in the Florida Theater, which I love that.
What format did this interview or contact take exactly?
I don't know the specifics. I wasn't here at the time, but the ghost told her his name was Jay and that he was there to look over and protect Joe Collier.
Who's that?
Joe's name was unknown to the psychic, so that's kind of interesting that she plucked his name out of the air.
He's a real person.
And Joe is a real person. Joe was the building engineer at the Florida Theater for many decades. He's retired now. But Jay seemed to have some affinity for Joe as the caretaker of the building. So we think that Jay may at one time have been an employee of the theater in maintenance or maybe a projectionist.
So does that freak people out? I mean, the idea that place could be haunted, are people sensitive to that fact?
It doesn't freak people out, but they sure are interested.
Yeah.
Because we get phone calls all the time from paranormal investigators who want to come and spend the day or often spend the night. Jay was most recently seen during last summer's renovations.
Oh, yeah.
At 10 o'clock.
You're kind of exhuming the spirits of the Florida Theater.
So at 10 o'clock one morning, just before the morning break, one of the painters working underneath the balcony felt someone standing near him and turned around, and there was a man standing behind him in blue work clothes, like blue Carhartt work pants and a double-pocketed work shirt. And he said hello to this man, and then the man disappeared before his eyes.
Ooh.
So that's the
Spooky.
most recent time we've seen Jay.
Okay.
Famously, Local Haunts, the local TV show, at 10, 20 years ago, captured a video apparition of a ghostly presence sitting in seats E1 and 2 in the balcony.
Ooh.
It looks like video fuzz to me. I mean, I've seen the tape, but who am I to say? So they're sure it's a ghost. And when we restored the seats of the theater 4 years ago, we put in all new seats throughout the theater except E1 and 2 in the balcony.
Wow.
Those two seats, we call them the ghost seats now. Those two seats we took and sent to the factory in Michigan and asked them to restore them and return them to us because we didn't want to take the ghost seats away.
Now, are those seats reserved?
They are not reserved. You can buy them at any show at the Florida Theater, and many times a year, people sit in those seats, and I'm sure many people know what seats they're sitting in, but I'm sure many people don't.
That is interesting. So you talked about people wanting to spend the night there. Do you accommodate that? Are there any tours that you give for people interested?
We regularly give tours of the theater, mostly to members and supporters. But we actually get so many requests for paranormal investigations that we just can't accommodate them all.
Really?
Well,
I don't have that problem. I mean,
we're a working theater.
Yeah.
There are, a show day. A show day goes from 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and we do over 200 of those every year. So there's not a lot of time when we can say, here's the keys to the building, stay overnight.
Have a sleepover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we turn them all down.
Okay. Have you heard lately any requests from any shows or anything like that in recent months or years? And does it kind of kick up around
Kicks up around Halloween. People are, always more interested around Halloween, but it's pretty much a year-round thing. And Northeast Florida seems to have a very active paranormal community.
Well, I think it's a great story, a great spooky story for Halloween. Numa Saisselin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, my pleasure.
All right. Up next, more than 70,000 graves at Jacksonville's oldest resting place. We'll uncover the grave details up next. Welcome back. As Jacksonville's oldest burial ground, Evergreen Cemetery spans 167 acres and is the final resting place for 14 Jacksonville mayors, 5 Florida governors, and 3 passengers from the Titanic. Joining us to tell us about its haunted history, or just its straight-up history, is Alan Bliss, CEO of the Jacksonville Historical Society and Jacksonville History Center. Hey, Alan.
Morning, Ann. Thanks for having me on. Happy Halloween to you.
Happy Halloween to you as well. It's great to have you. So this cemetery is vast. It's beautiful. For people who haven't been there to explore, it is just a lovely place to go. A lot of shade trees, but it also has just a remarkable history. How do you kind of, when you're doing tours, where do you begin?
You know, you can take almost any small section of the cemetery and start from anywhere and just weave all kinds of interesting stories into the experience. The whole Evergreen Cemetery is really one of the most beautiful, stunning, interesting, and moving places to visit in Jacksonville. Most cemeteries are like that, but over 80,000 lives are memorialized with the headstones in the cemetery. When you think about it, it's one of the most populated neighborhoods anywhere in the city, and nobody ever complains about city services.
There's
or
no zoning requests?
No,
or- yeah.
yes, none of that. Traffic is calm. But it's always a pleasure to visit there, and it's always a pleasure to introduce other people to the stories about the place. As you say, it's one of the most historic places in Jacksonville. It was established in 1880. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2011.
What was the city like back when it was built? Like, where was it relative to kind of the heart and soul of the city?
Oh, it was way out in the countryside. It was it was intentionally sited out there because everybody thought, well, there's never going to be any competition for land use out here in this part of the country. It was
And for people who don't know where it is, it's like North Main.
It's up on North Main Street. It's several blocks north of Andrew Jackson High School. And at the time that the cemetery was built, shortly after it was built, a railroad depot, a railroad stop was added to the railroad that went from Jacksonville up to Fernandina Beach. And that made it easier for people to visit the cemetery as they were traveling by train in and out of Jacksonville. It made it easier for people who had passed away in Jacksonville to have their remains, their coffins shipped up north, which some people did then. Some people still do that now. But when you visit a place like Evergreen, and Evergreen is really everything that you think of about a cemetery, but kind of elevated to to a really sort of unusually intense level. It's an experience for the living, and I think really the stories of the people who are no longer living, they're memorialized there. They were buried there by their survivors, by the people who were living. Their headstones were placed by those who memorialized them, cared about them, showed up for the interment ceremony. And a lot of times when you look at those headstones, you look at the people who were buried together in a plot nearby, and stories about their relationships, the relationships of the people who have passed. Those stories kind of come tumbling out from those headstones.
Are there any repositories of information that tell those stories other than just kind of what you can glean from what's on the headstones? Like, is there a resource that people can go to find more information?
We've actually been developing a series of narratives that we use to guide us in our tours of the cemetery, and we have a number of docents, some of my staff members, and also several volunteers who lead these narrated tours. But you're kind of bringing up a good point. There really should be a narrative. But, you know, the cemetery is it's constantly growing. It's like every other place. It's expanding. The cemetery has room for at least another 30,000 internees for in-ground burials, from what the CEO tells me, from Mike Ondina, the guy who runs the cemetery, has been in this business for 40 years, as he puts it. There's plenty of room for expansion and growth there, and then they have mausoleums as well. But you point out that there are a number of really significant and interesting figures from Jacksonville's past and from U.S. history past who are buried there.
And just briefly, I mean, if people want to go visit the cemetery, how could they hook up with a tour? Are there Halloween-themed tours, or are they just regular?
It's regular tours. You know, the cemetery does not really associate itself, and nor do we, with with the so-called ghost theme sort of discourse about that. So, but we've done 4 tours this year, and we've got another one coming up this Sunday. There still is room. Sign up through our website, www.jackshistory.org.
Alan Bliss, it's always nice talking to you. Thank you so much for bringing the story of Evergreen Cemetery.
Thanks, Ann.
Happy Halloween.
Likewise.
All right, up next, a costumed bike ride through historic Riverside that's sure to exorcise away any unfriendly ghosts.
Elder Source's T-Care program can help caregivers avoid burnout. Caregivers that assist Northeast Florida residents aged 60 or older may be eligible to get resources for themselves at no cost. More information at myeldersource.org.
Voting is underway, not just for president, but on Florida amendments, local candidates, and more. Understand the issues with Jacksonville Today's unbiased voter guides at jaxtoday.org/vote.
On the next Fresh Air, how foreign power...
the former president certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure. I think he'd love to be just like he was in business. He could tell people to do things and they would do it, and not really bother too much about what the legalities were.
Never in American history have so many former presidential staffers issued such a dire warning about the man they used to work for. Are Americans listening? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Over 70 years ago, children across the country became ill from orange food dye found in Halloween candy. California recently banned a number of synthetic dyes linked to health risks. Now the FDA is rethinking the chemicals allowed in our food, and it's working on a new plan to regulate food dyes and additives. We look at the facts and the push to address our fears. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, while Halloween is taking center stage, it's also the 9th annual Mobility Week this week. And here to discuss that are the masterminds behind the Day of the Tread Halloween bike ride. Garf Cooper, owner of ZenCog Bicycle Company. Hey, Garf.
Hey.
And also Tanner Pletsky, Day of the Tread ride leader. Hey, Tanner.
Hi there. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So tell us a little bit about this ride that you're leading.
So this is a new take on a weekly Thursday ride that we lead out of ZenCog, a local bike shop on Stockton Street. FDOT approached Garf and said they had some goodies for us to pass out. And we said, well, how about we wrap this into like an all-in-one Day of the Tread Halloween-themed costume ride. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so it is. What are the parameters? Like, who can participate? Do you have to dress up? How long is the ride?
So we're not mandating costumes or dressing up, but we like, and for the past year that we've been doing this ride, I really like it to be a beginner-friendly ride. I say we ride far, but we don't ride very fast. So we have all different types of bikes there, beach cruisers, people in, nicer road bikes, but we have almost a no spandex policy. So if you're thinking about those guys on A1, those guys on A1A who are, riding in their underwear, no shade to them.
Party paced, like nice and chill.
What if that's your costume though? Dressing up as the spandex guys on A1A.
That could happen.
This is the one day of the year where it's allowed.
It's acceptable. So Garf, first of all, I would guess there's some costumes that probably people ought to avoid on a night ride, right? Like things that impair your vision.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
I would definitely try to be as visible as possible. So at least light your bike up, but maybe not have something that covers your peripheral vision.
Mm-hmm. Do people always use their own bikes, or does ZenCog provide some?
We can rent tonight. We'll have some rentals at special priced rentals. And we will, and you bring your own bike at this point. So,
yeah.
But if you need a rental, please let us know earlier, the better. We have about 15 available for rent. If I don't think we'll rent out.
So where does it go once it takes off from ZenCog on Stockton?
We're going to basically stay in the Riverside area. And so we're going to kind of go from the shop and then kind of go south and kind of do a loop. And the focus will be the great Halloween decorations that are in the neighborhood.
Are you stopping to trick or treat?
We can. I mean, that you're on your own. I don't think we're going to intentionally we're going to trick or treat here. Unless there's little kids, then we maybe can do some of that. But we're going to kind of keep a focused parade kind of style route. And it should take about should take about 45 minutes to an hour and 15.
Tell us a little bit about just the Mobility Week angle. Why is it important to you, as a cyclist store owner, to talk about those issues? And what does the week aim to accomplish?
Well, I think DOT's idea is that they just want to make people aware that there is alternative forms of transportation. So they just released the app, the Roll Stroll. Ride Roll Stroll, which is pretty neat. It kind of ties in with your Pacer app and your Garmin app, and it has a point system. And I'm just kind of getting into it, but I thought it was neat, and I went ahead and downloaded it, and I'm working on figuring it out.
Does it help you map out routes that
It
are
will give
safer,
you give you places to ride. It's the Ride Roll Stroll. That's it.
Okay.
It's neat. It has a point system and some rewards, and it's kind of cool. And I mean, we're probably already you're using some kind of app right now. Like Strava is great. The Garmin app is great. The Pacer app is great. And these trackers help you stay motivated with your fitness and your riding. We rode here today because it's Mobility Week. We rode our bikes down,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and it is kind of difficult to ride to downtown during rush hour traffic.
Past a lot of construction.
We got a lot of dirty looks, lots of construction. There's, the infamous cobbles in the middle of the
Those
downtown.
are not a lot of fun on a cycle.
It's just clear that a lot of things were built with cars and almost nothing else in mind. That said, there are some great initiatives and new construction happening, like on Park Street. The Emerald Trail is a great thing. I used to live in Springfield. I just moved to Riverside, but I would take the Emerald Trail from Springfield to Riverside to work at ZenCog most days, and it's getting better. But yeah, there are still some places like Riverside Avenue going over like what almost feels like a highway overpass. So we like to ride in numbers, strength in numbers. I think there's something really important about being in a group and drivers seeing a group of cyclists for the first time.
Yeah, I
and
wanted to ask you about that. I mean, what role does this ride have in trying to just increase the visibility of cyclists generally, or awareness?
So I think there's two sides of that question to answer, because there's the driver side and there's the rider side. So a lot of folks who come on the group ride for the first time are shocked to see how far they can go on a bike, because riding somewhere alone in Jacksonville is really risky and scary. But riding, I give a bit of a speech at the beginning of the ride. I say we're like a big limousine, basically. If we all stick together, we have safety in numbers, and people have a ton of fun on the ride because they realize how accessible and like freeing it is to ride a bike. And I think drivers get a little bit confused. They're often actually a lot nicer than you would expect. They're kind of like, they give us a lot of space. They wait, and they don't really know what to do. But there's a lot of other places that have kind of figured out a sort of a truce between riders and drivers, and they're learning firsthand, how that works.
Well, Day of the Tread gets rolling tonight at ZenCog for Halloween. Garth Cooper, Tanner Pletzky, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Yep, and happy
Ride
Halloween.
bikes.
Ride bikes. That's our program. Thanks so much for listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. Join us when we talk about the week's biggest headlines, including a 50% decline in the city's murder rate. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Congaree & Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com.